Where's everyone at today? Small turnout. We're
I'm
gonna
good,
miss the
Max.
beginning
I'm
of the
just
fun.
5 minutes away from home.
Okay. Well, at least you're here on time. Well, in the meeting on time. All right, let's go ahead and kick it off. Probably not a super long stand up today. How are we feeling about all the capstone presentations yesterday? Anything surprise you? Anything that you want to discuss after 24 hours of marinating in all of the projects? How are we feeling?
Pretty good, I think.
Less
Some of
desperate
us
than
were
say on
talking.
Saturday.
Yes, yes, that's always a good feeling. And we're a month and a half away from the next check-in, right? But hardest part of getting any project started is always or the hardest part of any project is always getting it started, right? And so you guys are over that initial jump. Now we got to just get the momentum going on the code side of things, and then your projects will be well underway, right? So just have a little relief in knowing that you have at least a starting point for your wireframes. Your wireframes may be completely done. You may need to add just a couple more things, thinking through that user functionality. And then you are off to the races on your HTML and CSS. So no JavaScript is required for the next check-in. So everything that we're learning in the next 4 weeks or so is not a requirement for that next check-in, right? So all we want to do is see you have the majority of your HTML built out. It doesn't need to be perfect. You don't need every single page done, every single component, but we want to see you kind of have that momentum in the code using Bootstrap. Feel free to use ChatGPT. Feel free to use Gemini to help you out there. But as long as we have that understanding of the code, what it's doing, the fact that we can read it and we can explain it to someone else, that's kind of where we want to strive for. With all of that said, we are going to get you back into some code tonight, and we will be project heavy for the next couple weeks for sure. So the project we are building tonight is this nice, teeny tiny little calculator. So we're going to get back into building things with our HTML and CSS. We're going to build this user interface out first. And then the way that I like to engineer things is, well, what's the order in which the user interacts with this, right? And if we can get the order of, well, what needs to work first, that often gives us the right order of engineering steps to go in and write that code. For more complex user interfaces, I do like to break it down into smaller components and say, all right, let me build out the UI for this component. Now let me get this component to work. Okay, now let me move on to the next component. But because this calculator is such a small project on its own, we're going to build out almost the entire UI. Then we will go back in, do our styling of it, and then dive into the functionality and making it all work. So with all of that said, let's head over to our My Code folders, which we have not been in. Well, I haven't been in since week 7. So we are going to, or since week 5, this is week 7. We're going to make a new folder called week 7. We're going to pop that open and create a new folder called day 3 because today is already Wednesday. Yay, short weeks. We are going to drag that into our VS Code. And we are going to create 3 files, an index.html, a script.js, and a style.css. I will get the live share started for you guys and into the chat. I'm going to go live and also share this. I'm going to head to my index.html. Again, 3 files that we created, index.html, script.js, and style.css. In the index.html, I'm going to use my exclamation point equals. This may be one of the only projects that we are actually not going to build using Bootstrap. So tonight is a Bootstrap-free night. However, I am going to update the title before I forget and say calculator. I'm going to put a link tag in here with a rel style sheet and a href to my style.css. I will throw an each one in here that says calculator. I'm going to throw my style.css in the lower half of my screen. I'm going to target that each one, and I'm going to say text align center. And I'm going to go over to my live server, make sure the word calculator shows up. And if it does, you are all caught up and good to go. I went a little fast there, but hopefully those are steps that are somewhat familiar. Give you all a minute. Again, you should have a centered text that says calculator. If it is not centered, your link rel style sheet may be missing or incorrect, or you may need to put in your style CSS your H1. Anyone need a minute? Everyone good? All right. We are off to the races. Anyone need help? Okay, nope. So we are looking at our final version of the calculator. We've already got our H1 at the top. So what I like to do is say, all right, let's get all of this HTML out first, and then we can go back in and kind of style it the way that we want it to. So the first thing that I notice about all of this is the all the buttons here and this screen is kind of all together in one div, right? And so that's what I'm going to start with. And I'm going to call that my container. And because we aren't using Bootstrap here, I can use classes that Bootstrap uses without it impacting my code. And that's okay, right? This project is something that we're saying we're not going to use Bootstrap at all. If there's ever a chance of Bootstrap being used in this project, however, we definitely want to be careful about naming our classes with something that may conflict with Bootstrap down the line. But because we're not using Bootstrap, I can say, all right, everything's in a container. Now I start from the top and work my way down. And the first thing that I have up here is kind of my screen, right? My display. So if I click on these numbers, they show up in that screen. So I'm going to create in my container a div with an ID of screen. And I'm going to just put the number 0 inside of it as a placeholder. That's how kind of we want it to start. I'm going to save. I'm going to come over to my live version. I just have the number 0 there. And I'm like, well, that's not pretty, but I want to get everything out on the screen. So that's our first one. I go back to our calculator and I see, all right, we've got 1, 2, 3, and plus. And each one of these is a button. So I'm going to group all of these in a div because I want a div for each one of the rows. And I'm going to add in my buttons. So I'm going to say button, the number 1. Nope, sorry. With the number, 1. I'm going to do another button with the number 2, a button with the number 3, and my plus sign. I save, I come back over, I take a look, and I've got 1, 2, 3 plus. Does it look pretty? Is it aligned properly? None of that, but I do have my 3 buttons there. Give me a second to catch up on those before we copy and paste.
I use the image shortcut on the button ×4. It's
Oh,
like
nice.
mad.
We'll do that for the next row as a reminder for everyone.
Bad my camera as well.
Once we get our first row of buttons in, we're going to make another div. And you know what? Let me put end of first row of buttons. End of second row of buttons. End of container div. Okay. In our second row of buttons, we can use an Emmet shortcut. Thank you for the reminder. We can type in button, say times Shift 8, 4, and hit enter, and that's going to automatically drop in all of our buttons. Now that is obviously very hard to see where the openings are and the closings. So if we have prettier on, we should be able to, well, didn't wrap as much as I wanted to. All right, so let's clean this up. End of our button, enter, closing button, enter, and our final button should be there. Okay, now we put in the next row, 4, 5, 6. And the icon is the minus sign. And then we are going to copy that 2 more times. So be very careful on your opening and closing divs. We want to get the opening div right here and the closing div here, but not the end of the container div. You get the end of the container div, we're going to run into problems. So I'm just taking the opening div all the way down to the closing div of a row of buttons, copying that, pasting it, and doing our final 7, 8, 9. This, I believe, is the multiply button. Yep. And I'm going to update my comment to say the end of the third row of buttons. Hope if I use English in my comments. And then we've got the final div, which will be a 0, divide, equal, and clear. We are going to take a break there, make sure everyone can catch up, but it should look like this when we are finished. And I'm also going to start a poll just to make sure I know everyone is caught up.
Hey.
Reminder to not vote if you are still working on it. It's not pretty, but this is what we are going for. You should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 divs, 4 of which are buttons. Like most of you are voted in. We'll give you 1 more minute. For everyone just joining class, I am repasting the live share link into the chat so you can join the live share if you need to. All right, anyone need one more minute? Okay. Or you can ask for help too. That's good too. For those just joining us, the live share link is in the chat. You may want to leapfrog by creating your 3 files, index.html, style.css, script.js, and then just copying and pasting the contents of my file into your own, just so that you can kind of catch up to where we're at. No new concept so far. We are skipping Bootstrap in this project, but we have our first interface kind of built out. Everything that we have done so far has been in index.html, except for this H1 text-align center. Okie doke, we're gonna roll forward here. So next up, we need to do some styling on all of this. So I'm looking at the final version of my calculator, and I'm going, all right, the first thing that I notice is this green border around everything and the fact that it's centered. So that's what we got to work with. So I'm going to say, hey, go target the container. Why the container? Because the container has our screen and our buttons and everything up there. So I'm going to start with the border because that's probably the most obvious. I'm going to say 3px solid green. If you would like to not use green, that is totally fine. The next thing that I notice is that this is a little too wide, right? And I want to pull that in. Now, you know I'm not normally a fan of setting width directly, but because I know the set width of this container, I know that it's not going to grow for responsiveness. I know I'm not going to have different images in there. I know that I can limit that down to a certain width. So I'm going to start by saying width 200 pixels. And I save and I go, okay, that's not quite right. Let me go into the inspect tool, right click inspect, or if you're in another browser, that is totally fine. I'm going to hover over to make sure I get the entire container here. And I'm going to go into the properties here and I'm going to say 175. Make sure I have the PX. And I'm like, all right, that's still a little too wide. If you hold in shift and use the down arrow key, it will jump down by 10 pixels. So I can play around with that and go, okay, I want that to be apparently 115 pixels. So now that I have that number, I can go back over to my code and say 115. And the last thing that I am noticing is that this is obviously not centered. So we definitely could use Flexbox here, right? We could justify content, we could move it over, but there is a more old school, easier way to build this. We can set our margin to 0 auto. And what 0 auto does is it says, okay, 0 is the vertical alignment, top and bottom. We don't need to adjust that at all. But the left and right, the horizontal side of things, we're going to set to auto. So it just automatically just dumps it right in the center there for me. And just like that, we have our calculator centered. All right. Moving on, the next thing that I notice is my screen. So that's what we're going to target next. I'm going to target my ID of screen. I already have the ID here, so I'm able to target it. And of course, the first thing that I notice about it is the background of it is green. So I save, I go, I look at our final version, and the next thing I notice is, ooh, that text color doesn't have enough contrast. So I'm going to do my color of white. And that fixes that. What's up next? The number is on the wrong side, right? When we think of a traditional calculator, when we type in numbers, all the text is over on the right. So I can text align that right. And now I'm going, all right, this is looking good, but I need a little bit of breathing room around all of that. So I'm going to set my padding to 10 pixels. So now my screen's a little bit taller. And I don't really love that Times New Roman font. So let's use a font family, and we can say Courier New or Courier or monospace. And the reason why we do that, oh, too many Courier News there, is this is a fallback system for fonts, right? Try and use Courier New. If you don't have Courier New, try and use Courier. If you don't have Courier, try and use the monospace default. And that gets my number showing up there. And I am almost done with the screen. The last thing I want to do is get these buttons right off the edge of it. So instead of padding, which is going to be applied inside my background, I want to shove everything down outside of my border, outside of my background. So for that, I'm going to use margin on the bottom of 15 pixels. I'm going to pause there, let you catch up on the screen and the container. Everything we have done so far is only in the CSS. If it does not look like this, done something wrong.
Bless you.
Buttons don't look quite right yet. We will get to those next. Anyone need another minute, or are we good to go? Okay, let's work on our buttons. So I'm going to target my buttons next. And the first thing that I notice about these is they don't quite align in a grid. And this is a font principle, right? When we work with a font like Courier New, we call that a monospace font. Why is it called monospace? Well, let's break it down. Mono meaning one, and space meaning the amount of space that this character takes up. Well, in monospaced fonts, every character is the exact same width. Well, that's not the case in most fonts, right? The fact that we've got the slash here, that slash takes up a different number of pixels than our equal button may or our clear letter. So what I want to do is I want to set the width of the buttons to be all the same, right? Because when we think about the look of a calculator, every character, no matter what number or letter is in that that button, is the buttons are all the same width. So I'm going to target my button, and I'm going to set a width of them to 30 pixels. And now we run into a problem where the buttons are now a little too wide. We got to fix our initial container. So I'm going to go back up to my 115 width, and I'm going to think, okay, well, if I made the buttons 30 pixels wide, if we do 30 times 4, we get to 120, but we may want a little bit more wiggle room in there. So I'm gonna up my width all the way to 160 pixels. And so my buttons have a width of 30 pixels, and then I can put a little bit of breathing room around those. So let's say I want some padding inside the buttons so that none of the text is right up against each other. I also want to say, hey, let's put some space to the left and right of those buttons. So now they're spaced out a little bit more. And also, let's put some margin on the bottom so that the rows are spaced out.
When I hover my mouse over the buttons, they kind of like get dark. Is that built in?
That is, yes.
That's cool.
Terry, you have a question?
Yeah, so why we couldn't like make the buttons bigger like using like screens like inside of screens how we have like pattern like and why we couldn't just do that like with like button like using like just screens.
What do you mean by just screen?
Like I mean like when like adjusting like the calculator to, like itself why we couldn't like um not only make the calculator bigger, but also like with 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 inside of the idea of screens, made the buttons bigger using like screens also.
Are you saying here we could say screen button?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would work.
Oh, okay.
We just couldn't or you could take this whole button and say, oh, apply that in the screen. And that well, that wouldn't work because the buttons aren't in the screen, they're in the container. So we couldn't put the button in the screen. We could put the button inside the container if you wanted to, and that would also work. But because the screen is not in the same div as the buttons are kind of separate. We target them separately. Give me 1 second. There's a setting I need to adjust. Okay. Um, All right, so we got our buttons in place. We got our interface working. Does anyone need help? Does anyone not have their calculator looking like this? Okay, we are done with the style.css, so you can go ahead and close that. I'm going to go ahead and pop open my script.js, and I'm going to put that in the bottom half of my screen because now we need to work on the interactivity of all of this. So we have our buttons here, and what I would like to do is be able to click on a button and have that number show up at the top. Well, we're going to need a lot of our document object model in order to interact with that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my number 1 button and I'm going to add, excuse me, an event listener. That event listener is an on click. Well, on the click of this button, I would like something to happen. What I would like to happen is a button clicked. And that is going to trigger an event. Then I'm going to come down to my JavaScript and I'm going to say const button clicked is going to get an event and it is going to console.log button clicked. Okay, lots of little syntax here as you're catching up. Const, because we're declaring a new variable. That variable is called button clicked. Equals is saying, okay, what do we want to store in that variable? We're using parameters here, those parentheses, to say, hey, we're going to get details when that button is clicked of an event. The equal arrow is saying an arrow function, saying, hey, what we're storing in here is an entire function, a block of code that's going to run. Curly braces are saying, hey, between this opening curly and closing curly, here's everything that I want to happen when button clicked is run. What do I want to do inside of that is console log out button clicked.
Real quick. So you have event in there. Don't most people use E as just another representation?
They do, and I absolutely hate it.
Okay.
The
I
reason
agree
why
with
I
that.
hate that is because E is like using I in a loop, right? What is I? How do we keep track of it? I have also seen EVT used, and I hate that less because at least you know EVT is short for event. But I like being very descriptive in my variable names. And just naming it E doesn't make it really clear that E stands for event, just like I. Is that for increment or is that for index? Is that what does I really stand for? So I like being a little bit more descriptive in my names, but you could technically call this whatever you wanted, as long as you were consistent with it in the function name or in the function block code.
And event is just being is referencing what is happening to the on click because you have placed the event in there, right?
Correct. So we're not doing anything with the event yet, but we will in a second to see the details of that event. So to test that, I'm going to go over to my console. I'm going to click on the number 1, and I get this lovely error message in my console. If you do not have your console open in your browser, now is your time to do that. Because if I don't have my console open, I would have no idea there was an error happening. If I close this out and click on 1 a bunch of different times, nothing happens. But because I have my console logged in here, I know I need to go to my right-click inspect, open my console, and what do I have? Uncaught reference error button clicked is not defined. And I'm like, all right, button clicked is right here. I have spelled button clicked exactly the same down here. My HTML should look at my JavaScript and know that those two line up. Why is button clicked not defined in my browser?
You said why is it not defined?
Yeah, why am I getting this error? Why am I not getting my console log button clicked out?
Is it because you have to connect the JavaScript to HTML?
Very good, yes. Just like we connected our style.css, we have not told our HTML that our script.js file even exists. So what we need to do is go all the way down to the body before the closing body tag outside of the last closing div. We need to say script src equals script.js. Now we save, and when we come over and we click the one button, we do get our button clicked showing in the console. If you do not have your button clicked, now is the time to figure that out. Anyone not have button clicked showing in their console? Okay. So now what do we want to do when our button is clicked? Well, we want to make it so when we click on one, it shows the number one in the screen. So we start out by saying, all right, in order to be able to put the number one in the screen, we have to be able to reach into our HTML and access that screen element. So to do that, we're going to say const screen equals document dot get element by ID. And the ID that we want to get is the word screen. Once we have gotten our screen, what we would like to do is say, hey, the screen's inner HTML is going to equal the number 1. Actually, it should work like this. So I save that, I come over, I click on the number 1, and the number 1 shows up. Okay, anyone not have their number 1 showing up? All right, so now I'm like, all right, now I press 2 and nothing happens. Then I'm like, all right, I'm pressing 2, nothing's going on there. Because we have our on click added, but we only have our on click added to the number 1. So I can copy this and paste this onto my number 2. Save. I come over here, I click 1, and the number 1 shows up. And I click on 2, and nothing happens. So I'm like, okay, what's going on here? I'm going to refresh this. I'm going to click the number 2, and the number 1 shows up. I'm like, okay, well, how can I solve this? What's going on here? We're saying, hey, whenever a button is clicked, logged out button clicked, we can see that in our console. Get the screen. Okay, everything's going great. Now go to the screen's inner HTML and make it equal to 1. I'm like, well, I didn't want it to be equal to 1. I wanted it to be equal to whatever number I just clicked on. Well, how do I know what number I clicked on? The number I clicked on is generating an event on the clicking of that button. In order to get the details of that event, what I'm able to do is console.log out the event. So I do that, I come over here, I click on a number, and it says pointer event. And if I pop that open, it's got all of this detail that's available about that event itself. But I've got something interesting here. I've got this target. And if I look at that target, the target is a button. And I'm like, oh, okay. So now I understand it's not just an event. The event had a target that it happened on. I targeted that in the when I generated the event. And if I scroll down here, I can actually see in here there is something that says inner HTML2. Well, that's pretty cool. I wonder if I click on 1, I get my pointer event here. I can scroll all the way down to my target. And in that target, oops, I can pop that open and see the inner HTML there is 1. So this inner HTML and inner text is storing which button we are clicking on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say const number clicked is equal to my event target inner HTML. And then I would like to
Can you
take
repeat that?
Yeah, the event target inner HTML. And we know we can access that because when we console logged out the event, we can look in the console and see what data is in there.
Okay. My bad. I'm writing as I'm doing this as well. Taking notes.
I was gonna say, Max, do we have to do another array type of situation, store the input of the numbers in the calculator, or do we
Well, let's
have to
see.
do?
For our screen inner HTML, now that we know what number was clicked, let's go ahead and set number clicked equal to that. So I save, I hit the 2 button, and I get 2 showing up. Like, okay, that's cool. I refresh, clear everything out. I hit the 1 button, and 1 shows up. And I'm like, okay, this is cool. Now, if I want to enter the number 12, I hit 1, 2, and I just get the number 2 showing up. And I'm like, okay, we're making progress, but when I hit 1 and 2 on a calculator, I expect the number 12 to show up on the screen. How can we solve that without creating any new variables?
Concocticate. I don't know if I'm saying it right.
Concatenate, yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say
Concatenate.
concatenate.
So what we're going to do is instead of setting the screen inner HTML equal to the number clicked, we're going to set the screen's inner HTML to whatever is currently in the screen plus the number clicked. So I save that. I come over here, I refresh. I click on the number 1, and now I get 0, 1. I'm like, that's not what I want either. But before we go and solve some bugs, let's hit the number 2. And now we get 0, 1, 2 working. So I'm like, all right, we're on the right track. If I keep on hitting 2, it keeps on adding it to the screen. But we've got a different problem there, right? We need to solve for the number 0. But after the number 0, everything works the way that we want it to. And we can keep on hitting 1 and 2 and have everything show up. How do we want to go about solving that 0 problem?
Can't you just initialize the variable at nothing? Or
Which
reinitialize the
variable?
variable? The screen.inner HTML.
Well, we could clear it out, but when a calculator first turns on, what does it display in the screen? It shows a 0, right?
Yep.
So I want to keep it when the page loads as a 0, but there's another way we can solve that.
If screen dot inner HTML equals 0.
You got it. If the screen's inner HTML equals 0, and we got to be careful here. The 0 has to go in quotes because inner HTML is always a string. It doesn't matter what data type we're pulling out of the HTML. What comes back is always a string. So we say if the screen's inner HTML is equal to 0, then set the screen's inner HTML equal to whatever the number clicked was. So I save, I come over, I refresh, I click the number 2, and now I get 2 2s. Well, I'm not a dancer. I don't like 2 2s. What's going on here? What's happening is we said if the screen's inner HTML is equal to 0, then set it equal to the number clicked. Great, that's working. Then it's also coming down here and using our previous code before. So really what we want to do is say if the screen's inner HTML is 0, then set it to the number clicked. Else, we want you to add that number onto whatever the screen's inner HTML currently is. So I save, I come over, I refresh, I click my number 1, and my 0 disappears. I click 1 again, and now I get the number 11. And if I click on 2, I also get that there. Pausing there, I'm going to start a poll just so I know where you guys are at. What should be happening in your code is that the number 0 shows up when you first refresh it. You can click on the number 1 and the 0 disappears and only shows you the 1. And you can click on 2 as many times as you want and start building out your number there.
I got a question. Why inside the parentheses of the if statement we use 3 equal signs and
Very
then
good question. Always 3, never 2. So 2 will work most of the times. What the 2 equal signs is doing is it's saying, hey, are these 2 equal no matter what their data types are? So if you said, if, don't follow me on this, just an example, if 1 2 3 equals 1 2 3, this is true. If we say the number 1 2 3 is equal to the string 1 2 3, then this whole thing is true. That is with 2 equal signs. But oftentimes we get caught and we go, no, 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 we want an exact comparison. We want to check that not only the values are equal, but the types of those variables are also equal. So if we say is the number 1 2 3 equal to 1 2 3 in a string, that we use a third equal for, which would make this now false. So the third equal is a way to not only check the values of the variables that you're comparing for logic for logical truthiness, but the third equal says, hey, not only should you check the values, you should also check to make sure the types of those variables are also the same. And so it's very easy to write a JavaScript if statement and accidentally realize that you're not checking the types as well, and cause if statements to run when you don't want them to actually run. So 99% of the time, you want to use your triple equals there to say, hey, I really want to make sure that not only are these values equal, but that the data types that we're comparing across of them are also equal.
Okay.
Is there a instance in where you would want to check the value but not the type, or like not care about the type, I guess?
Yeah, so the big one that you get caught in is you can say const should run equals false, and const run times equals 0. And if you said if should run is equal to runtimes, this would run, because 0 is a falsy value, and so should run is false. 0 is also considered false when you compare it in a logical operator, so this would actually run. If you did a triple equals here, this would not run.
Is the 0 being falsy, is that particular to JavaScript?
A lot of programming languages consider 0 a falsy value.
Oh, because of binary.
Yeah. Okay, we are going to take that out because that's not really relevant. But triple equal, almost always when you write an if statement, good idea to check for triple equals, because you will run into times where you go to like check the length of an array, and you don't want to, you want to make sure that it is actually 0 and not something like false. Okay, we are going to roll ahead here. Let's go ahead and do attendance really quickly. The attendance for tonight, the word is falsy. Falsey. Falsy means it is not the actual word false, but it means something close to false. The computer considers it false. If you misspelled it, it's okay. It's the word false with a Y at the end of it. Falsy values in JavaScript are the word false itself, the number 0, undefined, and null. And there may be one other one that I'm blanking on. Okay. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, we can take this on click and we could put it on every single button, but that seems a little not dry, right? When we think about DRY, don't repeat yourself. So I don't really want to add an on click to every single button here. There's got to be some way that I can write in my JavaScript to apply that to every button. What JavaScript concept does it sound like I need in order to make something happen over and over again?
A loop?
A loop. So in order to loop over something, I need the thing that we are going to loop over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the bottom of my JavaScript file, and I'm going to say, hey, I want to store all of my buttons. And how am I going to get my buttons? Well, I need to go to the HTML document where all of those buttons are. And instead of get element by ID, I'm going to get all the elements by the tag name. And the tag name of those are all buttons. Right? I'm going to get these buttons. Now, how do I know that that works? I need to console log out all of my buttons. So I go ahead and save that. I come over here, I look at my array, and I see all of these different buttons. And the kind of cool thing is if I hover over them, I can see it in the top half of the screen showing me that I actually have access to those buttons. Now, I can't just say all buttons dot on click because my that would be the entire array. What I need to do is get access to each individual button in that array of all of the buttons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out my console log all buttons because we know that the buttons are there because I can see them in that console output. And I'm going to say, hey, for make a const of each individual button. And I want each individual button of all the buttons. And for all of the buttons, I would like to target the individual button and add an on-click event of my button clicked. Where's my button click coming from? Oh, wait, that's my function that I made up here. Now I can save that. I can come down back to my calculator, type 1, 4 in, and actually get 14 showing up. And I can click another number, and now my function is all working. Does anyone not have their calculator numbers showing up?
What I'm having going on is when I click on one of my buttons, it doubles it.
Okay. You want to share your screen?
Yeah, sir.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, fine.
Okay. So where do you think we need to go to debug that?
Thinking of my HTML. One click button. Nope. Console log. Get on screen. Console log event. Const number click equals target. Somewhere right here for some rhyme or reason after I did the 3 once I called it with the 3 equal signs, I meant not equal signs, equal signs, it for some reason it just started bringing up 2. I don't know why.
So tell me what this line of code is saying.
It's saying that you know when my 0 was displayed at first, it's saying replace that if the number
Nope,
0
it's not saying that. What is line
Oh.
9 alone saying?
if screen equals
It's not saying replace it. But what is line 9 by itself saying?
to equal out, I have no idea, Max.
All right. So if we're saying, okay, if something is true, what do we care about what is true? If the screen, where's the screen coming from? The screen is coming from our HTML document. with the element that has the ID of screen. Okay, now take that screen and look inside the inner HTML. Does the number 0 show up in that inner HTML? If it does, we are going to go on to line 10. If it doesn't, we're going to go to line 12. That's all it's saying. It's not saying replace it. It's not saying, all it's saying is if it is true, then do one thing. If it is not true, do the other thing. So so let's trace this through. Go to your browser and refresh. Click on the number 1. And we get 2 1s. Okay, well, initially, that screen did have an inner HTML of 0. So go get the number clicked. Number clicked is coming from right up here. It's getting the inner HTML of the target of the event that we clicked on. The event that we clicked on, the target was the number 1. So we take the number clicked, which is the number 1, and we shove it inside the screen. We do not do this else statement because the if statement was true. What do we do to end out this function?
Sounds like I just removed my whole else statement.
Nope.
Jesus.
The first time we click on the number 1, the number 0 is in the screen. So go ahead and replace whatever is in that screen with the number clicked, which is the number 1. Where do we end the function of button clicked? What line number?
Where do we end the function of button click? Talk to me, man. I'm confused. I'm not gonna lie.
What line number do we start the function of button clicked on?
F screen enter. Click. We started button click up at the first const.
Yep. Line number 1. Where do we end button clicked?
We are ending button clicked. I don't want to say all the way down at line 19 because it was working properly before I put it in there. Before I added all that.
Where do we end the function of button clicked?
Jesus. Oh no.
How do we make a function? What is the point of a function?
Is to get an outcome from one of our true or false statements?
Nope, that's an if statement. When we start a function, and particularly in the arrow function, it needs a couple key things. We have to say const, so it knows it's a new variable. We have to name that variable, which is storing the function. We called it button clicked. We need to tell it is equal, so it knows what to store inside of it. We need parameters here, so it knows what data is getting sent inside that function. We need to do our equal arrow sign so that it knows that we are storing a function inside this variable. And then it needs to know what code do I run when you ask me to run this function. We do that by using an opening curly brace right here and the closing curly brace right here. So we are saying when button click is actually run, it is going to do everything from this opening curly brace all the way down to this closing curly brace. None of this matters when the button clicked function is actually running. So what we are doing is we're saying because button clicked ends here, we now know that all of the code in here is going to run. So what do? We log out button click so we know that it's connected. We get the ID of screen and we store it in our variable called screen. We also get the inner HTML of whatever the target is of the event, so we know what number is clicked. We do our if statement here. What's the last thing that we do in our function? What line number does the function end on?
The function is ending on line number 14.
How do we know where a function starts and ends?
Jesus Christ.
A function starts with an opening curly brace and ends with a closing curly brace. What line number does the function end on?
Line 16.
It sure does. So we did all of this work up here. What's the last thing that we need to do inside this function?
We gotta close it.
On what's the last thing? What line number do we do after we are done with the if statement from 9 to 13?
13. What is the last step that we do? Jesus. I don't know. I don't know.
What is the only line of code between line 13 and 16? Line 15, right here.
Screen dot enter HTML equals screen HTML plus number clicked.
This we already did in the else statement up here. So what you have told it to do is if the screen's inner HTML is equal to 0, then store the number clicked inside the inner HTML. If whatever is in the screen's inner HTML is not 0, then take whatever is inside the screen's inner HTML and add on the number clicked. But no matter which is true, whether it's the if here or the else here, no matter what, we are also going to then take the screen's inner HTML, take the number clicked, and add it to the inner HTML of the screen.
So I told it to run it twice.
You sure did. So take that line 15 out.
Gotcha.
Go ahead and save it. And see if you get your double number issue.
I'm not getting it anymore.
There you go.
Right. Real quick.
Hi, I have a syntax question real quick.
Shoot.
So I'm taking some notes about how to connect the JavaScript with the on-click
Yes.
syntax.
Yep.
And the part where it says button clicked in the HTML, is that a variable for the on-click?
This button clicked.
Yeah, would you call it a variable?
That is it is a variable. It is a variable that's a specific function. So this button clicked needs to line up with whatever we call it up here. This button clicked is also referenced down here. So now that we have added that function on, we no longer need it here.
Oh, okay.
However, this button click could be called anything, right? We could call this
Yeah.
num press if we wanted to. And as long as we called it num press here, it would also work.
Okay. Is that like standard procedures to call a button clicked?
Not necessarily. Num
Oh.
pressed would be a good function name for that, or click happened, or whatever you want to call it, doesn't matter.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that brings up a important thing here. What is our JavaScript doing to make all of this work? Actually, before I forget that, because we have linked up our for loop, because we have added that on click on, we no longer need it up here because this for loop is taking care of adding it all on for us. So we can now go back into our HTML and actually take out these two on click events because we've got the for loop happening here. Okay. Now that we've got that out, I am going to beat understanding into you all, because what do we want to do next? We want to dive in, right? We want to go, oh, I want to make the plus button work. I want to get the equal to work. Hold up. we just wrote an hour and a half's worth of code here, right? We need to make sure that we've got that level of understanding here to understand how the computer is running this, not necessarily the order that our brain wrote that code. So what do? We start at the HTML. The browser loads in the HTML and goes, okay, number one, load HTML to show user interface. So it goes in here and it goes, all right, H1, I know how to do that. Div, okay, a container. All right, we're doing divs. We're moving down the screen. All right, now that all of that is done, we need to now, number two, load CSS and apply styles to selectors. All right, so we go into the CSS, we take a look at here, we go, all right, oh, H1, I gotta center that container. Oh, you want that to have a green border. Okay, great, I'll go process all of that. Now it comes down, excuse me, shows the rest of these buttons. I'm doing great, and it goes, oh crap. Number three, go load script.js JavaScript file. So now we come into number four. This file runs from number three. All right, so the browser comes in and it goes, oh, you would like a new variable. So we say number five, make new variable called button clicked. And what data type is that variable, right? Because all variables have a data type after we set them equal to something. Well, we know that this is a function. How do we know that this is a function? Because we have parentheses here that are taking in the parameters, because we have an equal arrow, which is saying, oh, store a function in this. And then we have what we call a block of code. A block of code is anything that is in curly braces. Where else do we have a block of code? We also have a block of code down in our for loop. That block of code is saying, hey, this chunk of code is going to happen when button clicked actually gets called. But because button clicked has not been asked to be executed yet, we haven't put a button clicked with parentheses, if I could spell clicked. That's one way to run a function. What's the other way to run a function? It's for this on-click event to happen. Because it hasn't happened yet, we say make a new variable called button clicked that stores a function but does not run yet. Whenever we make a function, it's going to go, all right, when you ask me to do this button clicked thing, I'm going to go do all of the code between these curly braces. But until you do, I'm going to ignore all this freaking code until you ask me to run. Okay, so it skips down all the way to down here and says number 6, make a new variable called all buttons and store in it all of the HTML elements that have a tag name of button. All right, so we're going, all right, document, that's our HTML. We're reaching back in, get elements by tag name. Okay, go get all of the buttons. Button is a string here. It is the parameter that gets, or the argument that gets sent into the get elements by tag name. It goes into our HTML and it retrieves out all of these buttons. Because it is getting multiple buttons, it is that returns an array. Why is it an array? Because we've got 16 different buttons here that need to be stored. So we now look at this and we go, all right, if we console log out all the buttons, we get an array. Well, we can't work with arrays directly. What we need to do is work with each individual item in that array. So what do we do next? We say, number 7, loop through each item of the all buttons array so that we can get access to each individual button. All right, now we are looping through all buttons of the array. We are getting each individual button. That means this for loop is going to run 16 times. It's going to start with the number 1, then it's going to move on to the number 2, then it's going to move on to the number 3. What do we want to do? We want to, number 8, take for each individual button, access the on-click property from the document object model, right? That's what we're reaching into the HTML, and set it equal to the function we defined in number 5 up here. All right, now number 9, all buttons have been looped over and assigned an on click. So we reach the end of the file and are done. Browser's like, I've done it. I've loaded up all of your code. I'm finished. Here you go. But wait a second. We did a lot of work up here. What happened to all of these? These only happen because we assigned an on click. So now each individual button does have this button clicked on it. So when I click on the number 2, what happens now? Now all of a sudden, number 5 wakes up and it goes, whoa, an event has happened. What we need to do is number 10, log out button clicked. So we know the function is linked to the button using an event. Then we, number 11, reach back into the HTML and get the element with ID of screen and store it in JS variable called screen. All right, then we access the event, the on click, the event's target, which is the button we clicked on, and retrieve the inner HTML of it. All right, we clicked on a button. We're going to get the number 3. We're going to get the number 5. We're going to get whatever's in that button. Then we are going to number 13, look at the contents of the screen if, and then we're going to say number 14, if it is 0, it is on first load. Override the contents and set it equal to the number we clicked on from number 12. So we go up here, we get whatever we clicked on, and we set it equal. Now it comes down, this else statement does not run because this if statement ran and we're done. Right? Because we come down, we ignore this else, we hit this closing curly brace. This closing curly brace says, oh, this is everything that happens when a button is clicked, and we're finished. We do not rerun this for loop down here. That for loop only runs when the page is first loaded. All right, what happens the next time? We click the first button, we go all the way up to number 14. We click the next button. We go through all of these steps again. We go 10, 11, 12, 13. and we come down here and we go, the screen's inner HTML is now no longer equal to 0. It is now equal to the number 2. So we instead come down to this else statement. We go into the screen's inner HTML, we take whatever is currently in the screen, and we append on using concatenation the number that we clicked on. We then hit the end of the function. We are done. We do not run the for loop again, because that only runs when the page is first loaded. And we now have all of our numbers functional. Terry, what's up?
You spell clicked wrong on line 16.
And I'm going to number these to 14, 15, 16, 17, 18.
I thought I'd let you know just in case, somebody, take your code from the
No,
GitHub.
all good. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, 19 steps just to make 2 numbers show up in the JavaScript. How are we feeling about understanding? Now is your time to ask questions about this, about syntax, about events, about variables, about functions, about the document object model. These are all concepts that we're using here just to make the buttons we click on show up in the screen. But we've got a lot of concepts. We got for loops in here. We got a lot going on. What we want to make sure that you can do is walking outside of this class, you can look at all of my comments, delete them, and write them yourself. That is the level of understanding that we are striving for in every single project. May not be able to do the project all by yourself from scratch without following me. That's okay. We'll get to that level of understanding. But we do want to make sure that what we are writing, what we do have working, is starting to soak in. Joe.
Max, a lot of the syntax is throwing me off too. Like I don't know when to use certain other like curly brackets from the regular parentheses. A lot of
Yep.
that.
So we're using parentheses for for loops. We're using parentheses when we are making new functions, whether they are parameters or arguments. And we're using parentheses whenever we are calling a function, right? So this console log is a function that is built into JavaScript. Get element by ID, another function built into JavaScript. Button clicked, we're making a function that isn't built into JavaScript. So we're using the parentheses here. Curly braces we're using whenever we have a group of code that we want to run. So we've got a group of code called a function here. So we're using curly braces. We've got another group of code down here. We're saying, hey, what do we want to happen for each item in this list? We want a curly brace right here and here. The only other time that we use curly braces is for objects. Those objects are saying, hey, we have key value pairs. The only other syntax that we do use is the square braces. We use square braces for arrays and only arrays.
Gotcha. Yes, sir.
Joe.
I might have missed it, but can you go over what's happening under the hood for the for loop? Like, it's not. Does it just do it as soon as it loads and it waits like asynchronously for the on-click event to happen, or like what's
Yeah.
actually happening there?
Yeah. So basically all of this JavaScript runs when we put our script tag in. The only JavaScript that doesn't run is the code inside the function, right? So a function will never run unless an event triggers it or that we call it in our own code. And so we haven't called our own functions yet. So this entire block doesn't run. What does run on page load, it stores button clicked into memory, so it knows how to do the function without actually doing it. So it will come down, it will run this on page load because we are calling a function called get elements by tag name. It is running over that for loop. So this on click will run 16 times, but we're not asking the button clicked function to run. All we're doing is storing the button clicked function in the on click. So this individual button.onClick button clicked is basically the equivalent of adding the on click right here and saying button clicked. So yeah, go ahead.
So basically, without it happening, you're essentially like, we did it for one of the other days, but is it just inner HTML where you would like kind of replacing, or like going into button and then putting the physical on click line in there without actually doing it?
You got it. And I don't know, it won't show us here, but if we look into the event listeners and pop open click, you can actually see it's linking
Oh, it is doing
script
it.
line 3. And if you look at script line 3, that is our const button clicked here. So yes, that is exactly
that
what
makes
it's
more
doing.
sense.
Yes. Good question. Who's next?
It's me. I just have a question. I understand that in a HTML, it's like get element by tag name, the method. But I'm just curious, like what exactly is the method in a HTML? Like what does it do?
Inner HTML isn't actually a method, it's a property.
Okay.
And that I don't want to say is getting in the weeds, but a method is like a function, right? So that's going to go run a group of code and return something back to you. A property, however, is something that is just like a value, right? It's just a particular thing. So if we actually look at the let me log out here the event.target. I don't know if this can do what I want. Yeah, so that okay, so if you look up the HTML DOM element object, this
Okay.
documentation will actually show you all of the different properties that are in your HTML that you can access in your JavaScript and vice versa. So basically what we did is we looked into inner HTML, and it says sets or returns the content of the element. So it is basically saying, hey, whatever text is showing up between this closing arrow and this opening arrow of the closing tag, that's what's going to be in inner HTML. And we can actually see that because if we console log out the screen.inner HTML, it shows us, hey, when this page first loads, Um, why? Why isn't that 13? Oh, I'm on the wrong file. We see the div ID screen here, and then we can get different properties of that. So the inner HTML that we're going to see gets logged out is whatever the value of the screen is before we modify it down here. So basically, inner HTML is just saying get whatever the number or whatever the contents of that HTML element are.
All right. Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions before we go on break? All right, go on break. Be back at 7:30 ran a couple minutes over time. When you do come back, I will ask you for another round of questions. So feel free read through this code, make sure that you understand the comments, and we will circle back after break.
So on the break, I try to do the extra credit, but I'm on the global scoping function, and I'm not understanding how because they want me to like assign oops global to 5 while having to use like let or con. I'm trying to see how is that even possible.
Is the answer var?
No, they won't let you use var neither. Like they want you to assign while using var, let, or cons. I'm like,
You want to share your screen and I can take a look?
this is what I was working on right here. And then it's an inside of func1 assign 5 to oops global without using any of the keywords. I'm like,
So the answer there is kind of an obscure JavaScript answer. All you need to do is say oops global equals 5. You know what? I'm gonna reset this. Okay, so declare the my global variable here. So you're gonna say my global equals 5. No, initialize it with 10, which is what it says to do here. And then inside the function, go oops global equals 5. My global should be defined. We did that using let or const. So we'll say let. And then outside of any function, initialize it with 10. Inside function 1, assign 5 to oops global without using var, let, or const. There we go.
oh,
So-
I've been doing it wrong. I've been putting I think double equal sign. I did double equal sign. I'm like, why is it not?
Double equals for comparison, but we learned earlier triple equals is normally what we want to use. But what they're trying to say here is, well, we defined this out in the global scope. We meant to do that because we use the word let. But because we didn't use let, const, or var here, what we accidentally did is made a global variable. So if we look at the output here, we get access to my global, but we think oops global should only be in the scope of function 1. But because we didn't use a let, const, or var, what ended up happening is we were able to access the oops global down here, even though it is supposed to be scoped inside just that function.
So wouldn't that be a local scope for its functions? So I'm trying to understand how did it add up my global with oops global then?
Yeah, oops global, in order to make it a local and not a global, you could use let. And now it won't be able to find oops global because it's scoped to just function 1.
Oh, okay.
So by basically not doing the const, let, or var, what we just did is say make this a global variable, even though we haven't declared it outside in the global scope.
Okay, I got it now.
Cool.
Thanks.
Of course. Any other questions?
Yes. I have a question about the sorry, let me find the line.
Yeah.
Oh, the third line in the constant function where it says event dot target. Like I know you got this target from the inspect function in your browser, but
Yeah.
can you go exactly to that place again so I can see?
Yeah.
Because I got lost in the sauce. There's a lot of words on the list.
So if we console log out the event and refresh and actually trigger an event, what we see is this pointer event in here in the console, right? And this pointer event has all kinds of stuff in it. I probably know about 5% of what's in here. But things like where was the mouse when the event happened? It was 597 pixels to the right and 151 pixels down. It has things like the pointer type is mouse, right? So it knows what the pointer was set to when we clicked on that button. It will show me the screen X and the screen Y of how big my window is, basically. If I were on a mobile device, it would know that, my device was tilted in a certain way, which you could see for games could be really helpful, right? Oh, they're tapping while they're tilting their device. You can see the type is click as opposed to something like a mouse down or a scroll event or something like that. But what we really want to get into is this target, right? Because why are we trying to access the event details at all? We're trying to figure out what button did they click on. And so if we go into the target, we can then see all of the properties of this button. And if we actually hover over the word button, we can see that it highlights the 3 button. That's the one that we clicked on, right? So the event's target will always be what the event was generated on.
Oh, I see.
And then inside the target, it's an HTML element. So we have all of the properties of the document object model that we are used to because it is an HTML element. And so all kinds of different properties in here, but the one that we care about is that inner HTML, is that 3. And so that's how we extract out, hey, the event, what was the event? They clicked on something. What was the target of the event? What did they click on? And then what property are we trying to get out of that target? What is inside of that button, the inner HTML, the number 3?
Thank you.
Of course, great question.
I also want to sorry. I
No,
also
go.
want to follow up with that. When using like inner HTML, is it possible to do like with images too? Or
Images,
do
you
you
wouldn't use inner HTML because an image is a self-closing tag, right? So instead for images, you would do .src, and that would give you basically the URL of the image.
so how would you know when to use inner HTML and document dot element by ID? Because when I tried doing it on my own, I realized that that's where I was getting a little stuck at, is how to, I guess, set it up.
So inner HTML we want to use whenever we're trying to modify the contents of what's in the actual HTML tag, right? So what's between the opening tag and the closing tag, that's what our inner HTML is. Compared to if we want to modify an attribute on an element, then we would use a different property for that, right? So if we wanted to, just an example, don't follow me here, we could do like img with an ID of my image. And we could go to Unsplash and I'm going to just copy this image URL. And I'm going to say src is equal to this long image, right? And so if I look at my calculator, I see my image showing up here, right? And we'll do well, a couple things we could do with that. We have our image, so what we could do is say const img equals document get element by ID my image. And this won't do anything on its own, but if we console log out the image, we can see here's our whole thing, right? Well, what if I want to do something like image.style equals width 100%? Now my image is shrunk down in my JavaScript. Well, how am I doing that? Because I got the element, I can use the style tag to set in my width 100%. So if we actually look at this in the browser, we can now see my style has a width of 100%. Well, where did that come from? That came, I didn't put the style up here. I instead, through the JavaScript, added in some CSS to that element. I could also do something like, oh, I want to change that image to this image. So if I copy that, I could say something like img.src equals my new URL. Now, when I look at the calculator, I get this image instead of the original image that I put in the SRC.
Oh, I wasn't even aware you could even do that in JavaScript, like put the image dot style. I wasn't even aware you could even do that. I thought you have to use like CSS for all that.
No, pretty much anything that you can write in your HTML, there is a way you can modify it in your JavaScript. And again, that's something that comes with a little bit of experience. But as you get exposed to more and more things, inner HTML and get elements, and you start to realize, oh, these are functions. This is the document object model. Oh, if I can set a style in HTML, I can probably set a style in my JavaScript. You get exposure to those methods over time. I don't want you to look at the list of all the different properties and go, I'm never going to learn all of these. You're right. You never are going to learn all of those. I don't know all of them, right? There are certain ones that we use frequently, like inner HTML, like dot style, like dot on click, right? We're basically thinking about these things as whatever we're putting here as a property will basically show up here as if we said style equals that thing. So that's kind of what we're diving into and modifying, and it's a two-way street, right? So if I didn't want to change the source image, instead I wanted to just get the image, the current image's URL, I could say console log image.src, and what comes out? This big unsplash URL that matches this here. So it is a two-way street in terms of being able to set it in our JavaScript to something new, but also being able to retrieve information from our HTML. So the whole document object model is modeling the HTML document as if it were a JavaScript object. And we can then update that JavaScript object, and it will use that model to update the HTML document itself.
And does that also work with like class too?
Yep. We could let me think about that. We could go to our style and say border is a border with 3px solid red. And then we could grab our image and say the class is now equal to border. And name, yeah, it's class name. And that is what adds our red border to it.
Learn something new every day. Appreciate it.
Of course. Joe, I'm glad it clicked for you. Do you want to attempt to explain the click in the way that it clicked for you? Because sometimes the way I explain it is not the way that other people will get that click.
Sure, I'll give it a shot.
Put you right on the spot for, one of the most important
Yeah, no.
concepts of the entire language.
Hey, it's on me. I just threw it right in the chat for everybody to see. Kind of my fault there. Yeah, so you were explaining it to Terry and showing him how you access using dot notation. And I'm like, oh, so JavaScript is literally just restructuring HTML into an object model. So every time you go into modifier, like you got your element, is that the base level?
Yes.
Okay, so you got like the base level of the element, and then you can go in further and further into what do you call them? They're not parameters of the element. Are they
Property.
just types? Properties? Okay. And they're treated as objects within that, and then the property values are treated as objects of the properties. Is that right?
The properties are on the object, and when you change the value, that value gets reflected through the document object model back to your HTML.
Right. Right. It was the I guess I didn't realize, because that's not like native HTML. Like if you never use JavaScript, it wouldn't be doing,
Correct.
not that you could write it, but like that interface, it's because they're interacting with each other.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's the part that clicked.
So if you think about what is a model, right? The whole point of a model is for you to understand the bigger picture, the real thing, right? And so the model is a two-way street. We can be in our object, in our JavaScript, and that model is what is translating it into our HTML document. And that is why we say document dot get element or whatever it is. And then that also works in reverse. When we want to take our HTML and make our JavaScript understand it, we model it as an object and then can update the properties, which will then update our HTML.
And that works for all the properties, or the certain properties.
The document object model is what defines the list of all of the properties that we can access. So yes, it kind of works for all the properties. Yes. I did want to take a minute because I know a lot of you guys right now are like, oh my God, curly braces, parentheses, syntax. He's just pulling this out of his ass, and I don't know how the computer is making all of this work. I promise you I'm not. This is the language of JavaScript, and why you guys are now thinking back to orientation and realizing that all the people who warned you about JavaScript were totally right. I would like to call your attention, however, to the assignments. Under optional assignments, there is the week 5 JavaScript module pre-reading. I know I have touched on this a couple times, but I want to start highlighting a couple of these resources for you because you are not alone in learning this, right? JavaScript is a standard. So while I do link to the Odin project, while I do have while I'm a fan of hands-on learning, not everyone learns hands-on. So there is this visual learning I love coding cheat sheet that makes you understand why I am not crazy. So if you click on this, it will download to your computer. However, if you pop it open, this is my secondary preferred style of learning. Draw arrows on everything so that we can understand it and break apart notes. So if we go through this really quickly, you're going to see a lot of the vocabulary words that I have been saying are actually defined here. All right, we're talking about data types. You keep on hearing me say string. This cheat sheet is giving you the visual of a string is literally any text in double quotes. All right, numbers. Numbers are just typed out, right? Booleans, we saw them a little bit, true, false. All right, objects. Objects have those curly braces, they have keys, they have values. You can have multiple key values in an object. An array. Okay, what's an array? An array is those square braces, and then it is a list of different variables. You will see, and the only problem that I have with this cheat sheet, it's a little dated, right? So we're using the word var instead of const and let, but we get the idea here of, okay, what is an operator? What is a variable? We come down into objects, right? We break these down into key value pairs. We see the data types from up here starting to be used down here. You will see parameters and arguments. You've heard me talking about a code block. The code block is anything between the braces, and it will actually define that out there for you. So I really love this because you can print this out. It is only 13 pages, And you can put this up maybe on your bedroom ceiling. So when you fall asleep at night, everything you're learning just is creeping over you. I won't actually, this is a rhetorical question, but I may have slipped into your nightmares already. If not, give it a couple more weeks and I will be intruding your dreams as well. But there are resources out here. So I don't want you to think that you're alone here. And if this one doesn't work, which is definitely my favorite, but there is more breakdowns here, right? So this is kind of Code Academy. We know this from our intro, right, of the admissions process. They break this down in a different way, right? So if you're more of a hierarchical person and you're like, I just don't get functions, you can go to functions and they give you an entire breakdown, right, of these definitions. So this isn't a textbook, right? We don't have a textbook for you to go to because we really believe all these different resources click in a different way for you. I was going to make a very inappropriate joke about the document object model in the bedroom and decided to be the better
Walked right
better
into
of
that
it.
one too, huh? Did that to myself again.
So there are things to break down in here. There are also things in here that are that we may not have covered in class. Do not panic about that yet, right? That's okay. We may get to it, we may not. So those are a couple resources. Wes Boss is a instructor I really value. He does have a couple free courses and a couple paid courses. If you are like, I want more of Max's style of teaching, but I can't take any more of his voice, go check out Wes Boss, right? Wes Boss is a great project-based learner. And then there are a couple videos in here, right? If you're like, free code camp, I'm triggered. I don't like free code camp, but I do need more resources. Maybe a YouTube style video of someone other than myself is how you will learn, right? So I'm not asking you to use all of these resources, but if you are like, all right, I'm picking up what he's putting down, but I'm still not there on JavaScript. One, don't panic. We are in week 2 of JavaScript. We have 3 more weeks to go after this. But if you're at a point where you're like, I feel like it's not sinking in, I feel like it's coming at me in class and I'm writing it and I'm understanding as he's doing it. And then I go to review it after class and I'm like, I hit a curly brace and I don't remember what a curly brace is. Come in here, check out these resources. There are visual things, there are videos, there is hands-on learning. And then down at the bottom, we have a bunch of textbooks, right? So if you are someone who like literally is book smart and wants to go read all of this stuff, we have it broken down in here. I've tried to order these resources in the order that I find them most helpful. That does not mean that you will find them the most helpful in this order. The last thing I will say is Eloquent.js is the most binary resource I have ever recommended or have run into. This is something where when people are not getting this to click, they've worked with all these different resources, they cannot figure out how to get JavaScript to seep in. Some people go read Eloquent JavaScript and are like, why didn't someone explain it to me like that in the first place? I get it. I personally find that they take too deep of a dive on these concepts and they make you understand it at such a low level in the computer that it's really hard for me to comprehend it at that level. I have read this so many times and I am like, I just don't think it works like that. But if you're telling me it does, it probably does. However, we do recommend it for some students because some students go through this and they're like, light bulb moment, I get it. This is awesome. Eloquent JavaScript is a free like online resource. And I'm pretty sure that you can buy it on Amazon as a physical book if you want. Yeah, I have it linked down here. So lots of resources for you available. And also check out the library because I love to read a book before or like preview the book before I actually go and purchase it. So some of these resources are available through Onondaga Library. If you do not have a library card, go out, check that out. It's really helpful for LinkedIn Learning as well after that. With all of that said, I want to open up the floor for 1 second. Has anyone hit on any of these resources or any resources that are not listed in that list that they have found super, super helpful?
Yeah, I did. I think the what was this one? No, not that one. It was I think it was the Code Academy reference sheet was is a good one for me. And also the visual learning. I love coding sheet because I'm more of a visual type. Like I try to like do the books and stuff, but I for the love of me I cannot get it. But from the visual learning thing, like it's actually like showing like how things work, and I'm able to like get it like that. I'm like, oh, okay, okay, so this is like how you do this, and this is how you do this. Same thing with the Code Academy one. Like I like it how you could literally be like, oh, well, I'm having trouble with what conditionals, and it actually like tell you like the logical operators and stuff, and actually shows you and explain it how like how things work and stuff. So I find these very helpful, especially with I think it was if I'm not mistaken it was the scopes because earlier like you helped me with the global scopes. I was having a little trouble with it, so
Yeah, all of these words that I'm using, all these vocabulary terms, you may have your eyes glaze over and you're like, he's saying words and I don't know what those words mean. Here's where those definitions are, right? And while a technical interview is never going to be like, define what a scope is, right? They may use something and they may say, hey, that variable is not in the scope of this function. Try and fix that. And you're like, right? And so that's when these terms are really helpful to go through. And of course, we have our vocab list, and we'll try and update that every couple of weeks as we're going through. But this is not the only resource. You cannot learn JavaScript in 12 hours a week of class time alone, right? So that is use these resources. Austin, you can for the he is really open-ended about what he considers documentation. So if you just make a PDF of the Meet the Students blog that just got published on the Hack Upstate Medium, I'm pretty sure anything that gets sent to that email automatically gets the coupon code. And the coupon code is the same for everyone. Joe.
Yeah, for another resource that I used a lot is if I'm ever having trouble like understanding a concept or something, like I can have like for instance what my question was earlier. If I plugged in what Ford was doing and asked like ChatGPT to like, can you explain what's happening under the hood here? And I can keep diving down and having like an extended conversation about a very specific situation, kind of take different pathways to those sub questions.
Absolutely. And just want to show you, if we take this and say, what is this line of JavaScript doing?
You're not sharing your screen if you want.
yeah,
Oh,
Max, we can't see you. Yeah.
So I went to ChatGPT, free account for everyone, sign up. What is this line of JavaScript doing? Const all buttons, document get elements by tag name button. This line of JavaScript is doing the following actions. Document refers to the document object model of the current web page. Get elements by tag name. This method is called on the document object, right? Document here. It retrieves a live HTML collection of all the elements, the document with the specified tag name, in this case button. An HTML collection is like an array, but not an actual array. It is a collection of DOM elements. const all buttons declares all buttons will hold the result of get elements by tag name. In other words, this is summarizing, this line finds all the buttons, stores them in an all buttons variable. This variable will contain the button elements present in the document. This collection will update if the document changes, for example, if buttons are added or removed. And you're like, okay. So you could go in here and say,
What's a DOM
uh,
element?
what is a DOM element? Right, and so it's going to give you a breakdown of what a DOM element is, the fact that it has properties and methods. It's going to tell you that it's interactive so that you can interact in the JavaScript. It will give you an example of that HTML snippet. It will show you, oh, inner HTML. Isn't that curious? Seems like we've used that before. And it will even explain that out to you so you can break it down, right? And this is what we're talking about in that level of understanding. Yes, syntax is a hurdle to get over. Once we get over that hurdle, though, we can dive into, all right, now that I understand the syntax, how do we know about all of this? So you could even ask a property like, how do I know what DOM properties to use in my JavaScript? Okay, and we'll just, okay, one, just like, in order to know how to interact with HTML in your JavaScript, you kind of have to know your HTML, so make sure you get that down. Then you got to identify the element. Oh, we have now used get element by ID, and we've also seen, we haven't used class name, but we have used by tag name. So you're like, oh, this AI thing is actually kind of close to what Max is teaching, huh? Then we come through and we go, oh, consult documentation. That documentation is the list. We happen to use W3 schools, but they're going to give you the breakdown of every single thing that you can do in the document object model. So you're like, all right, maybe this is getting a little too deep for me. Maybe let me go back. Oh, here are some common properties and methods. Get element by ID, get elements by tag name. We just saw those for the first time. Oh, inner HTML. We've seen that one as well. Attributes we haven't worked with yet, but we're getting into, wait, didn't Max just use .style? This is another way that we can work with those HTML attributes like style, like src. Oh, look at style. We actually applied a style like that. Event handling, add event listener. Oh, that's kind of a similar way to the way that we added the on click down here. All right, what else do we have here? Create element, append child. When Ryan comes in, he's going to show you other ways of modifying your document object model without necessarily using the strings directly. And then finally, experiment and test. Here's an example. We're going to do this little thing, and here's how we're going to add the little click listener to it. Now you may see, okay, add event listener click. We haven't done that. But draw parallels to what did we do? We achieved this another way. We achieved this through the dot on click. So that is a good point of, hey, when we're writing our JavaScript, when we're interacting with our JavaScript, there are multiple ways of achieving the exact same thing. Some people may think one way is better than the other, but that is a subjective thing. So understanding, hey, when we do see these other resources, they may write function not using an arrow function, kind of the old school way of writing it. That's okay. It will still work, but it's just an older style of doing it. Like we have right here. And again, you can carry on this conversation in that last example. Can you show me how to add an event listener using an arrow function instead? So the HTML doesn't change at all, but what does change in this add event listener, oh, now they're using parentheses and the equal arrow, which is closer to the syntax that we understand or that we know. You will rarely hear a teacher say AI is your friend, use AI, but the AI knows JavaScript inside and out. And when you have a list of questions and want to go back and forth, I'm not saying AI is always right. I'm not saying that it's the only way to learn, but it is a really great resource for getting these examples, and hearing someone else say, oh, you'll just learn this over osmosis. Well, okay, but isn't this so much more reassuring to go, oh, here are 5 things, and it turns out I do know more about intro to JavaScript. I am getting comfortable with it because I do recognize some of the things on this list.
I got one. I got one more question.
Shoot.
Probably a dumb question, but what is deprecated?
Deprecated or depreciated, not quite the same word, but they pretty much mean the same things. Um, uh, it basically means we had a feature and we don't encourage you to use it anymore because there's a better way of doing it. And so it usually is, I'm trying to think of the blink tag is a good example, right? In HTML, if we wanted text to flash on and off, we would use the blink tag. And the HTML standards board was like, we don't want you to use that anymore. It may still work in the browser, but it's a terrible user experience. You shouldn't do that anymore. So we are going to deprecate or depreciate that feature. And that is basically saying, hey, if you write any new code, we highly advise you not to use this. And normally when something is depreciated, they will give you an alternative and say, instead of doing the blink tag, instead we recommend you use JavaScript to animate that text or use a CSS animation instead. Let me see if
Yeah, the reason why I said that because I see it on like W3 schools when looking at the DOM properties and methods, I see like anchors is like has that word. So
yeah, and so you'll see here it says it's being deprecated because the blink component is being deprecated, right? And so they're saying this doesn't work. And then they'll say, but in this example, it does work because they're using a JavaScript alternative to it. So whenever you see the word deprecated or depreciated, it just basically means this is an older method that might not work anymore. We're slowly removing support for it. Here's how to do it instead. All right, before we return to the calculator, any questions, comments, questions about the code we wrote, questions about resources? We feeling a little bit backing off the edge? We feeling like, oh, maybe we can do this.
well, I'm definitely feeling I feel like I could do it, but because like I don't want no dom in my room, so I'm not trying to do all that.
We good to return to our calculator?
Yes.
All right. So where did we leave off? Well, we have it. So if I refresh this out, we start at 0. I can say 3, and that shows up. I can click on another button. 3, the plus shows up. I can hit another thing, and I'm like, all right, equals. Oh, I'm on the wrong one. Just kidding. 3 plus 6. I can press the equals button, and we get the equal sign. And we're like, oh, we're so close. The first thing that we need to do to make the equal sign work is we want to tell the equal sign, hey, I want you to behave differently than all of the other buttons. So we got to go back to our code. We're looking in our JavaScript and we're like, where did we say, hey, I want something to happen if that button is clicked on? So it's not on the button clicked. This is what happens. This isn't saying we would like this to happen when something happens. So we scroll down, we go to our individual buttons, and we get our individual button clicked. So now we want to modify this a little bit. What JavaScript concept do we need to use to make something happen conditionally?
If
If.
If.
So what we're going to do is we're going to say if the individual buttons inner HTML is equal to the equal sign. Then I would like that individual buttons on click to fire the equal clicked. Else, you can go do the button clicked that everything else runs. Okay, break down the syntax a little bit. We are actually looking for the equal icon, the equal key here, right? So what we're saying is look at the individual button that we're getting from looping over all of the buttons. Look inside the HTML of that button, and if the inner HTML of that button is equal to the actual equal sign that we're looking for in a string, I would like you to do this equal clicked thing. Otherwise, I would like you to do the button clicked function when that button is clicked on. So I save, I come over here, I type 3 + 6, I hit the equal button, and I get this uncaught reference error, equal click is not defined. Well, we didn't have that problem on the button clicked because we define button clicked up here. So what we also need to do is say const equal clicked is going to equal a new function. We're going to use our arrow function syntax. And now we get into, okay, what happens when the equal button is pressed? Well, I kind of want to know that everything is wired up at this point. So all I'm going to do is console log out equal clicked. I save that, I come over, I type something in, I hit the equal button, and now I get my equal clicked instead of the error. So a couple things that we did here, we moved this code around. Make sure that you don't have anything extra hanging out in this for loop. We want this for loop to do one thing and one thing only, and it takes a couple lines of code to say that. We want to say if the button that we're looping over is the equal button, assign the equal clicked function to the on click event. Otherwise, it's not the equal button, it's one of the other buttons. So instead, use the button clicked function. Okay, now we go to our equal clicked, we make a new function, we console log equal clicked, we come over here, we click the equal button, we make sure that we have that in our terminal, or sorry, in our console, and because it is there, we know we are good to go. Okay, now let's make it work. So what are we trying to do? Well, we kind of need to know what's in the screen so we know what to add up. So we're going to borrow another line that we already wrote. We're going to say const screen equals document get element by ID. Go reach into the HTML, go find a div with an ID, or go find an element, doesn't have to be a div, with the ID of screen, store it in JavaScript as a JavaScript variable called screen. Now, what I would like you to do is make a new variable called result. And the result is going to be an evaluation. Eval is a built-in function to JavaScript. Eval basically says, take whatever is entered as a string and run it as if it were my own code. And what I want you to eval is the screen's inner HTML. And then we don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, so just console log out the result. So I'm going to come back over to my browser. I'm going to say 3 + 6. I'm going to hit the equal button, and look what I get in my console. So we get that over the finish line. We say, hey, go back to the screen's inner HTML and set it equal to the result of the eval. And finally, I come over here, I say 3 + 6, I hit the equal button, I get 9, and our calculator is now functional. We've got 2 more concepts to go, and then we will be done with our calculator. We've got a clear button down here, and if I hit the C button, I get 9C. Like, well, that's not what I want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to say else if the individual button dot inner HTML is equal to the letter C, we would like the individual button dot on click to equal the clear button. Now I'm going to make my const clear button a new function, and I'm going to give you guys 4 minutes to try and make the clear button work in your own code. So you got until 8:20. What do you do inside that function in order to make the clear button work? Think about how a calculator works. What happens when you hit the clear button to the screen? What shows up there?
It clears everything up.
It does, but it leaves something in its place.
A 0.
Mm-hmm. Oftentimes when we're engineering, we get caught in the code of things, right? So what we want to do is really break this down into the smallest possible steps. So if you can't say what you're trying to do in English in a paragraph, you will never be able to code it out yourself. So break down what you're trying to accomplish sentence by sentence, and then it becomes easier to do it in your code. We need another minute. All right, let's power through. So the clear button, I'm looking at it and I'm like, all right, when I click this thing, I want this to change. So I got to get my screen first. I'm going to say const screen, document, get element by ID, get my screen. Now I know I want to change the screen. What about the screen do I want to change? I want to change the inner HTML inside of it. And what do I want to set that inner HTML to? I want to set it equal to 0. So I save that, I come over here, I refresh, I type in 3+, I hit the clear button, and I go back to 0. The last thing we got to handle, if I say 9 times and hit equal, I get this ugly error down at the bottom, right? And I'm like, ooh, unexpected end of input. Well, what's going on there? I said multiply 9 times nothing. And I'm like, all right, I want to make this show the user that there is some kind of error. So what we are able to do is go back up to our equal clicked function. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, try to do these lines of code and catch any error that may be thrown. And if an error pops up, go back to the screen and set the screen's inner HTML to the word error. So now when I say 9 times something and hit equal, I get my error. Give me a second to catch up on that. Again, we're doing a try. We've got a curly brace, which is a block of code. We're saying, here's all the things that I want you to try. And if anything gets thrown there, if there are any errors there, catch them. And then what should happen if we catch that error, go back at the screen and set it equal to the word error. Joe, what's up?
Just a little efficiency question. Could we just declare screen
Yeah.
in instead of writing it twice?
It's actually a efficiency thing of, well, you can make screen a global variable and then we wouldn't have to get the element 5 gazillion
yeah.
times, which is the
Fair.
right answer, but
That's fair.
just for the sake of going back and forth between the DOM, it's a little clearer.
I seem to be having an issue. It's still showing up just C for me.
Okay, share screen. Actually, you know what? Before you do, there's one last thing I want to do, and then you guys can get out of here. The last thing we got to fix for is if we say 9 times equal and we get the word error, if we click on a number after it, it says error 3. We're like, whoa, that's not what we want. So the last thing we have to do for the evening is in the button clicked, we want to say if the screen's inner HTML equals 0 or the screen's inner HTML equals the word error, go ahead and take whatever's number is clicked and clear it out at the end. And so now if we say 6 minus equals, we get the word error. We click on another number and it clears out the word error, and you are good to go for the evening. So we'll spend the next 7 minutes helping you guys debug, but we are officially done with our calculator for the evening. Okay, Austin, now I will help you. Sorry. Reminder before you head out of here, this is the first major JavaScript project, right? So fill out that 30-second feedback form. Let me know how you are doing. Let me know how I am doing. Very helpful for future classes. Okay, your clear button, get it.
So I do something like this, and then I enter to add C.
Yeah, so what we did is, let me just make sure. Yep, so you got your clear button linked up here. So it is doing this function. What we want to do, I think this is what I just put in. This error thing is supposed to be
Oh, oops.
here.
I'll say it was, yeah, it was still doing that before I added that part, but yeah.
Sure about that?
Oh,
you know what it is? You've got a lowercase c here, but in your button, you used an uppercase C. So we
Okay.
can fix that in either spot. It doesn't really matter as long as they match. And now we can hit the C. And
Sweet. Okay. Whew. Thank you.
Who's the next victim?
I guess I'll go. I had
Sure.
a issue. Today. I'll just share my screen.
Yep, go for it.
What a larger.
What's the problem that you're running into?
My calculator, my numbers aren't appearing anymore.
Okay. So that appears to be an issue. You give me thank you. I think you accidentally typed the letter C here and didn't mean to. So all buttons here has to match all buttons here. See if that
Right.
fixes the problem.
Yes, it did. Of course, it's always a typo. I mean,
That's all it takes.
yeah,
Well,
that'll do it.
but that is a good thing to debug, right? Of all right, where did it break? It's breaking when I click on an item. So where do I get all of those items from? I get them all from all buttons right here. And then where do I attach the on click? Well, I do it here, but I can't get to down here unless I am looping through the right thing right here. So that's how
Right,
I debugged it so quickly and saw where that typo is.
right. I knew it would fall somewhere in the button category, but I ain't look good enough. Thank you.
Of course. Who else needs help?
I think Bear got his hand up.
Think I figured it out.
Awesome. Good work.
Sorry.
No problem.
I don't really need any help, but I had like a question when you made us do the clear button um function. I actually did it way off because I tried to put a conditional in there, like if like the value button is equal to like C, and I was gonna have it like clear out or like make it 0. I don't know if that's the right way of doing it, but
You want to share your screen? I think it's just an alternative. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing it that way.
yeah. So like right here, I try to do a little conditional right here, but
Okay, so the problem with that is that this clear button, let me request remote before I talk out my butt.
Yep.
Okay, so clear button. Clear button. So we already did the check here. So we know that clear button is only ever going to be run if the inner HTML of the button is equal to C. So because we did the conditional here, there's no reason to do another conditional up here to check it.
I see. Like I don't know, like from the way I was thinking, like put a conditional and then when it like somebody press C, it like clear it out, but I don't know where I get that from.
No, you're on the right track. We definitely need a conditional. We just happen to do the conditional down here. And so because we did that at the higher level, we know that the clear button function is only ever going to run if the button's contents is equal to the letter C. So yeah, you're right. We definitely need a conditional. We just solved it at the step before, so we don't need to do it in the clear button function itself.
Okay.
The other way of thinking about it is you could say if the button clicked, you could say here, you could say something like if the event target inner HTML is equal to C,
Mhm.
then screen inner HTML equals 0. Else, go do all of the junk down here. So that's another way of thinking about it is if the button clicked, go figure out what the inner HTML of the event target is. If it is C, then do this thing. Otherwise, go do all the other stuff if it's basically any other button. So that's another way to think about it. But because we solved it at the on-click level, we don't want to do the conditional here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Appreciate it.
Of course. Back, and you're good to go. Any other questions while you have me? Cool.
Why didn't we have to program the plus and minus and such?
Why didn't we have to?
Yeah.
Because that's what the eval is doing. So this one line of code is basically making our entire calculator work. So if we console log out the screen.inner HTML and we type in 6 times 9, 6 times, I'm on the wrong. 6 times 9 and hit equal, we see that it's literally 6 times 9. And then what's the next thing we see? 54. What the eval is doing is it's basically saying, hey, take literally 6 times 9 and run it as if it were JavaScript. So this eval screen inner HTML is basically the equivalent of typing 6 times 9 in here. So the eval is saying take the screen inner HTML as a string of 6 times 9 and run it as if it wasn't a string, run it as if it was actually JavaScript code that we typed in. And so it's like, oh, I know how to do 6 times 9, right? That's equal to 54. So store 54 in the result and then stick it into the screen. There are some security concerns with eval. It's not something that we would necessarily want to do in production code. But when we're like, listen, I've got this text and I would like you to run this text, that's what the eval is good for.
Yeah, I was gonna touch upon that when I was looking at eval on W3 school. It's telling me in red, do not use eval.
So eval is more important not to use for server-side code, because we're taking user input that isn't necessarily trusted and telling JavaScript to run it. So eval can be really dangerous because the user could type in some of their own JavaScript and eval would run that as if it were code that we wrote ourselves. So that's why eval is dangerous. But when you use it properly, like on a calculator, right? Like on something where the user isn't actually able to type anything in, they actually have to click on the specific buttons to generate that input. That's when eval is a little bit safer.
So you want to use eval for like strings and stuff, essentially.
Well, 6 times 9 right now is technically a string, right? Because it's the characters of that, but you wouldn't want to use it for when the user has like an input text field where they're allowed to type in whatever they want.
So how does the computer know what's an error and what's not an error? Is it because of the eval?
Yeah, so the eval is what's throwing the error. It would be the equivalent of if we said const result equals 6 times, it throws an error, right? And it's like unexpected token semicolon. Well, it's like, well, hold on, you told me to multiply something and there's nothing there to multiply. That's what eval is doing for us. It's going and it's saying 6 times, 6 times what? Throwing that error, and that's what we're catching here. So if we click the equal button, it would do that. But yes, it is the eval that is throwing the error, and then we are catching the error and setting it even.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, good question. It is past time. You are up to it. Fill out the 30-second feedback form before you head out for tonight. or fill it out tomorrow morning, whatever. I will still get the results. But you have survived your first real, I mean, to-do list is a real app as well, but you've survived your calculator. You have immersed yourself in the world of JavaScript, of functions, of variables, of loops, of the document object model. Again, if these are all words that you're like, I am hearing them in one ear and they are going out the other, check out those resources. But tomorrow we will dive into the weather app and get more practice with these concepts. The good news is the list of concepts does not grow significantly between now and the end of the JavaScript modules. So we overload you at the beginning, and then we just keep practicing and practicing and practicing until you feel comfortable with them. Yes, Austin, definitely fine to share that coupon code for West Bowes. West Bowes was false. I always forget how he pronounces it. Stick around for the next 30 seconds in case any questions pop up. Otherwise, fill out the 30-second feedback form and GTFO.
Wait, Max, I got a question. Do we have the input like the notes for the feedback or
If you have notes, yes. If you don't have notes, then go ahead and submit it. That's fine without it.
okay? I was just trying to think of a note to come up with. I'm like, I don't have any notes. At least
Quite all
not
right.
right.
All right.
All right.
Now, have a great night, everyone.
You as well.